The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena. The television screen is the retina of the mind's eye. Therefore, the television screen is part of the physical structure of the brain.
All right, welcome back to another episode of The Outer Reels. I'm Jason. With me, as always, is Sam.
Here we go again, man. This is fun.
This is fun. Episode 14, Dead End Drive-In. This time I'm doing a Brian Trenchard Smith movie, or as I like to call him, BTS.
Not only BTS movie, but also another Aussie movie that I never saw. And it has quite a huge cult following. I was surprised about just this year.
Well, it's so funny because we had no idea that it happened. Was like Shout Factory or something?
Yeah, it was Shout Factory. Thank you. Yeah, and it was like...
But yeah, it's so funny. We had no idea we're finding all this out after we watch it.
Right, and that's kind of the problem with this show, is I'm like, man, this is something I haven't seen, I haven't heard, and like I find some crummy copy on YouTube or wherever because I can't rent it anywhere. And then I'm like, oh, lo and behold, a Blu-ray. You know?
Well, at least it's not 4K.
Yeah, that's true. Anything but James Cameron 4K restore.
Oh, yeah.
The True Lies Play-Doh, it looks like claymate. I can't. That's a whole other discussion. But
I've seen the stills, and I'm just like, oh. Yeah,
I think the world needs to stop at 1080p. That's it.
Well, no, you can go to 4K, but don't do all the upres. If there's film grain, who cares?
Yeah, make it bigger. It just looks so much better and so much warmer.
Just scan the 35 negatives and leave it at that. Don't be running all this processing stuff.
Well, since James Cameron's probably listening, I'm going to ask him two things. I'm going to say,
sure he is.
Give me a proper restoration of True Lies and give me a sequel of True Lies. That's all I want. I don't want to hear about Avatar. I don't want to hear about the Titanic. I don't want to hear about your submarine. Just do more True Lies.
I need to check out The Abyss 4K. It's the only movie I care about.
Do you know the connection between The Abyss and Terminator 2?
I probably did at some point, but I'm grasping at straws right now.
So the company in The Abyss is Benthic Petroleum, right?
Right.
And Terminator 2, when they go and stay over at the gas station for the night and they pull the bullets out of the T-800, the gas pumps have the Benthic Petroleum logo painted on them.
There you go.
It's a great tie-in.
Yep. Oh, and I should forget, we're also forgetting to mention aliens in all of this.
What do we actually call Dead End Driving? What is this? Let's say you're on the Paramount lot and you're off to craft services. You stand in line with Marco Brambilla, and you won't know who that is, but he directed Demolition Man. And
see,
you need to pitch him.
You had said that before, and I totally forgotten again. Anyway, sorry. I'm in the commissary.
Yeah, and you need to pitch him Dead End Drive-In before you get up to the counter and take your first.
Given what's going on at Paramount, I don't think there's anybody running that commissary anymore.
There's nobody at Paramount anymore, that's for sure. Yeah, they need a hit, man. There's
they need somebody cleaning the floors, looking for the next buyer. Yeah, I don't know. I've been trying to think of a good pitch for this. It's hard. It's hard to get it down and concise. I like to compare it to other movies, but
yeah, like a 2-sentence.
Class of 1984, but in post-apocalyptic Australia, but not Mad Max post-apocalyptic Australia, and takes place in a drive-in. So it's one location.
That's a pretty efficient pitch because that's what this movie is. We find out really after a very short first act. We end up in the drive-in, and then we're there for the remainder of the two longer acts. Yeah. My pitch would be about a kid who enters a drive-in and he becomes a prisoner there, and he has to discover why nobody else wants to break out.
There you go.
So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of this movie. So this screenplay was written by Peter Smalley. So it turns out this guy was a script editor on this movie called Spirits of the Air and Gremlins of the Clouds. And this is a pretty arty looking movie. It's not something we would probably cover on here, but the reason I wanted to mention it is because this movie was written and directed by Alex Proyas.
Oh, nice.
I mean, we all love Dark City, and that's great. And so I haven't seen really any of his prior movies, so I would check it out for the sake of it. I watched the trailer, and it doesn't really fit what we cover here, but I'd recommend if somebody's looking for something a little different, At least look at the trailer. It's a gorgeous looking movie.
Well, I will make a note of that, and I will check it out.
You'll probably like it.
Yeah, probably.
Another couple of tie-ins here is the second assistant director on this movie was John Titley. After this movie in 1987, he went on, and in 1989, he was also the second assistant director on the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie. I've referenced many a times, and I consider one of the best Australian movies, quote unquote. And let's remember that with the 89 Punisher, this was cut by Tim Welburn. And then also this movie was cut by Tim Welburn, who also cut The Chain Reaction,
right?
Who also cut Road Warrior. So this is like a 3 trifecta connection on this movie. There's some good pedigree in here.
Yeah, well, I've really come to notice that the Australian movies are almost worse than the Canadian ones, is that they just keep dipping from the same pool over and over again. But it just tells you, like, these industries, how small they actually are.
And especially in the early days, like we were noticing with the Canadian ones, we were finding all the same people and everything that was popping up. And so speaking of editors, this movie was cut by somebody else who we've also talked about before, and that's Alan Lake. But check this guy out, right? He was a post-super on Man from Hong Kong. Then he was a post-super on Death Cheaters. And then he cut a couple of shorts, and he went on as full picture editor on Turkey Shoot, straight onto BMX Bandits, a couple other things, and then he landed picture editor for this movie, Dead End Drive-In. But then he goes back to a post coordinator on his next gig, which is none other than The Howling 3.
So, he's good enough to be post super and editor for BTS, but once you get to Howling 3, you're knocked back down to coordinator, bitch.
It's just, Howling 3 is the Avengers Endgame for all the Aussie stuff we've looked at. Like, all roads lead to that movie, Howling 3, The Marsupials.
I like how you went Endgame and not even like the first Avengers.
I worked on the first Avengers. I didn't see any of the other ones.
Well, because the first one was the one that led up there, but Endgame's a good excuse, because Endgame's the one, there's like, 18 or 20 movies all lead to Endgame. Should we jump back to the beginning of the movie, or?
And then, it opens with title cards. So you don't get a prologue, but you get some title cards on the opening of this movie.
Yeah, and I should say, this movie starts like with a massive bang. Like, first title card comes up, and there's a huge music sting at the same time. Card after card telling you all the crap that's gone down in the world to lead it to this state. How there's riots in New York, I think, and something goes down in South Africa.
Incremental amounts of deaths and people dying from different reasons, and there's civil unrest.
Yeah, and then the last card comes up and it says inflation, shortages, unemployment, crime wave.
Basically, that last title card is describing San Francisco in 2024.
That took me a second, I'm sorry. But then we flash to golden hour, sun setting. But on top of that, there's like an orange filter on it, I guess, to make it look more, more pollution-y or something.
Polluted.
Yeah.
We don't see that orange filter anymore.
No.
And I remember that orange filter from the intro, very similar as at the opening scene in Neon City. There's a dirt bike riding across the plains, and it has that same orange filter.
Yeah.
I also remember it from the opening sequence of Hardware, which we'll probably never do on this show, but God, that's a great movie.
It is a good movie. Yeah, so orange filter, and then we got some thumping synthy 80s tunes, and super 80s font. And up comes our title, and then our protagonist, as I like to call him, Krabs.
This is Jimmy Krabs Rossini.
Yeah, and he's running because he's a bit of a fitness nut.
Yeah, this opening sequence looks great. There's, it's the classic nighttime, wet street, neon reflections.
Graffiti everywhere.
Trash everywhere, like graffiti everywhere. They went overtime on the set, on the production design here.
Must have gone through cases of spray paint on this movie.
It looks really good. I mean, it's clearly just one street, but it sucks you in right away. And all of his movies, they always look great, but this one just has that vibrance and the music along with it.
Krabs is, I'm guessing he's supposed to be like 16, 17, maybe as old as 18. But that actor, that dude's like, what, 35, 36? I mean, I looked him up and he's in his mid-30s. So
you're right. That assumption is so on point, because originally in the casting for this, Ned Manning got to meet Brian Trenchard Smith, and he went and did a casting call for it. And Brian Trenchard asked him how old he was, and he said, I'm 25 years old, but he's actually 36. He got the job.
I mean,
So you're dead on the.
it's hilarious because he's got a receding hairline. It's very funny.
I mean, we've seen these movies time and time again where you have clearly adults playing teenagers. But
it was notorious
this one
in the
is,
early 80s for sure.
Yeah, it was even more so. And this one was this is pretty egregious.
It was. It is quite funny how he's supposed to be playing this. Like, he's twice the age he should be. It's very funny.
But he does a good job on the role.
Oh, he does. He's good. It's just there are some lines in his face. There's that receding hairline. You don't buy him as a 17-year-old. You just don't. But I quickly forgot about it.
Yeah, exactly. He's directed well and he acts well. So the reason this movie looks so good too is the DOP on this is Paul Murphy. He was an additional photographer credited as on Chain Reaction, and he went on to be a DOP on the Power Rangers movie from 1995. Yeah. So he grew up and he got on the big Hollywood bandwagon and he's doing good. So yeah, Krabs is jogging down the street and we get introduced to his girlfriend, and that's Carmen, Natalie McMurray,
who is I think like 17 or 18.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, she looks a little more of age for sure. And this is her first movie. I don't know anything else she was in. There's something called Stones of Death, which looks kind of interesting. And it's about a housing development built on an Aboriginal burial ground. So it's basically the Australian Amityville ripoff, which...
So he's jogging around, he comes up, he meets her, and he arranges they're going to go out on Thursday. They make a big point about it's Thursday. And then like some ne'er-do-wells show up, and all I really remember is a throwing star ends up embedded in a poster of Rambo, and I thought
well, I was all about that because you see that poster one other shot on the main street, and it's a still frame of Stallone from First Blood Part 2, but the poster has a frame and edging around it, and it says Rambo 8, his latest. Rambo takes Russia. To be fair, I wish there was 8. I love all of them equally. I guess the movie is set in the early 90s, so maybe they're thinking by then there's going to be 8 Rambos, but bad to do kind of guys are trying to give Krabs some shit, and then he turns it down and he diffuses the situation and runs off, and then out of nowhere 2 tow trucks just come screaming out of the corners, and there's a yellow tow truck and a red tow truck, and it becomes very clear that they're like warring companies. They're these 2 different tow truck companies, and they're all about scrapping because the world's still operating. It's just operating at a lower denominator. So there's a lot of people just trying to survive out there. So
I almost feel like this movie could take place maybe a year or 2 before Mad Max. Because Mad Max, there's still civilization, but it's crumbling and it's falling apart.
Exactly.
And,
there's
crazy.
This is a whole weird scene because Krabs jogs down an industrial area and then he runs into a garage. He walks in and there's 2 cars there. There's a convertible 56 Chevy, red and white drop top, and there's a red tow truck. And at first I thought to myself, I was like, first glance, I was like, is this the 55 Chevy from Frog Dreaming? Because it's the exact same trim and color, but it's actually a 56. And Frog Dreaming so it's 2 different cars, but it's sort of, I would wonder if they tried to get the same car or something for a nod and then they couldn't. But
yeah, maybe in Frog Dreaming he wanted the 55, but he could only get a 56 or vice versa, right? So
yeah, something there. Yeah, it's very strange because it feels so close to being deliberate, but it's different.
Yeah,
Krabs lives in this house that looks like a nightclub. And his mom's like cooking spaghetti, and they have the tow truck and the Chevy. And his brother comes out who is named Frank.
He's big.
Who is, it's played by Ollie Hole. They start working out together, and I think the spin is kind of put on that Krabs is tiny and he's puny and he's just, never going to be big like his big brother Frank.
Yeah, Krabs is more like his dad, God rest his soul, apparently, because Dad's long since passed.
Right, so, who was smaller, apparently.
So I guess Frank takes after the giant mom. It's like,
I guess so. So then Frank is, we're introduced to the family while they're eating, and we get a little backstory on Dad's not around anymore, and he was like his papa. He was a small guy. And Frank gets ready to go to work, And Krabs is all like, "Hey, can I take the Chev out?" Like talking about wanting to take it on his date that he's got set up.
Right.
And then it's established that Frank owns the Chevy and the tow truck, and he says no. And then Krabs says, "Well, can I come for a ride along in the tow truck tonight?" Frank mentions that there's a group out there called the Car Boys. Krabs isn't big enough yet to go in the tow truck, but then he just changes his mind. He's like, "Yeah, okay, you can come along."
Yeah.
They hop in the truck and they take off, and there's radio chatter and there's talk of an accident or something going on. And Frank mentions something about trying to beat the Car Boys to the accident.
Pull up, and his brother hops out and basically tells the cops, like, "I'm first on the scene. This is my salvage. First on the scene, the salvage is ours." And we're like, he's like, "Yeah." And so a fight ensues.
Yeah, it's trying to set up this thing where there's these two companies and these guys are just at each other, and the only real law is whoever gets there first on the scene. And there's a funny part where Frank is grabbing a corpse that's leaning out of a car, who's still kind of alive, and he's having the corpse sign a document. He's like, yeah, you just sign here, mate. I'll take your stuff. And so,
well, because the ambulance hasn't shown up yet. And but you get the impression like no one's making new cars anymore, so all these parts are super valuable as things start to wear out. So that's why they're just doing their damnedest to get their hands on all this stuff.
Right. And in the midst of the two tow truck companies sort of going at each other trying to get all this stuff, the quote unquote Car Boys show up. And they're another kind of group of salvage people, but
they're like a gang.
Yeah, they're more like a gang, and they're not as organized. They only have like hand tools and stuff. They don't have a tow truck. I think they're in like an HK Monaro or something. It's one of the earlier Monaros.
Yeah, it's kind of reinforced and it's covered in graffiti.
And there's a news crew shows up, and they make a big spectacle of the accident.
Channel 7 again.
It is. We kind of get the idea that Frank gets the gig here and everybody else sort of backs off, and Krabs is set on the duty to try and defend the tow truck from the Car Boys while Frank does his work and loads up all the scrap. Then we have a really strange cut, and it's daytime, and now
I have a note. What is this scene in the Mini? There you go. Yeah, so he's got a pie delivery Mini.
Big dog pies.
Group of car boys come after him. They jump on the car and he knocks them off, and it's just like a bunch of driving around, and it's kind of a cool little sequence, and it goes nowhere.
He doesn't do a delivery. He doesn't pick anything up. You just see him with the sign on his car getting attacked by car boys. A strange cut, and we're just the 56 Chevy driving on the freeway with Carmen.
Yeah. And then suddenly it's like the next evening, and I'm like, oh, I guess it's Thursday night now.
And then so Krabs and Carmen are cruising along, and they pull up at a stoplight, and there's just a guy in coveralls with goggles, and he's got a gas-powered cutoff wheel, and he's just grinding on the light post and just screaming and yelling.
It's a street light. It's a signal light post, and he's just going at it, and they cheer him on.
It's like, I think this is just setting up, just people are crazy, and they're scrapping and getting a hold of anything they can. But this guy kind of reminded me of Mel Gibson from the beginning of Chain Reaction.
Lapping up those sparks. But, and I think it's around here where Krabs gives Carmen a gift. And it's like a little box, and it's all done up. It's gift wrapped nicely with a bow and stuff. And she unwraps it, and it's a lighter.
They continue on their date in the 56 Chevy, and they pull up to what is known as the Star Drive-In. And we meet the guy who's running the box office named Thompson. And he's played by Peter Whiteford, who's a very classic Aussie. He was on every TV show you can imagine. And and there's a sign that talks about like pricing for the movie ticket.
Krabs basically says they're too unemployed, so they get a discount when they go in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's like 3 tiers of ticket prices, and the unemployed are the cheapest ones. And Krab tells Thompson that, but Thompson kind of double takes at the car.
Yeah, but you realize later on this plays into why they get stuck in the drive-in and why they can't leave. Basically the drive-in, we'll get to it, but it's kind of like a concentration camp. There's a bunch of people in there who are happy to be there. I think the reason why they get stuck in there is because they're unemployed, and Thompson just decides, well, if you're unemployed, I have mandated to hold on to you. So again, it takes the entire rest of the movie to figure this out.
Yeah. None of this is clear at the moment, and you're like, wait, what is happening?
This is after I've had a few days to think about it. but and kind of piece it all together. I think that's why. And so Crab's just trying to be cheap.
And then as soon as they roll into the drive-in, the movie that's playing on the screen is nothing other than Turkey Shoot.
Turkey Shoot! Which, as we find out, it's the first of two major Easter eggs in this movie, because later on we're watching The Man from Hong Kong.
I know. It's like back to back. It's so funny. Their drive-in movie marathon is like our Australian podcast series.
Oh, Brian.
It's still the same movies. What's interesting about seeing Turkey Shoot playing up on the screen is that they actually show the head explosion. And that was a big problem with the ratings board back in the day, too. They pull into their parking spot, but Carmen doesn't like where Krabs has decided to park, right?
Because there's a cop right beside them.
And the cop is like a paddy wagon. I think it's an F-100 with like a canopy on it, but it's all got like wire windows and stuff on it. You can't see anything in it. It's a little ominous looking, and Carmen's not too happy about that.
So he moves. What I remember thinking, like, nobody seems to care that these guys showed up halfway through a movie.
The biggest no-no in a drive-in. Just even tapping your brake lights. It's like, no, just, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But he's just moving around, and he goes and parks, and there's a whole bunch of cars there. There's a whole bunch of empty spaces, too, but there's a bunch of cars there. They park and then cue the movie rain, and it starts hammering down rain.
Big old rain screen.
For those who aren't in the know, like us, it's really hard to see rain in a movie. Like, if you're just shooting stuff, it's really hard. You usually see other things instead, like you notice raindrops on stuff. Then you see the actual falling rain. It's really hard to pick that up. So if they want to show rain, that's when you basically, it'll open up the fire hose.
Which is why, if anytime you see rain in a movie, it is just hammering down. Like the light sprinkle just can't. It just doesn't.
No, you can't see it. No. You just don't see it. So anyway, so it's hammering down, and then we cut to Carmen and Krabs folded the seats down, made themselves a nice little bed.
And I love that tiger blanket in there. It is awesome. I wish I could get one. Tiger blankets are so hard to find in a good print these days. They're scaled wrong, and it's around. This one just looks great. There's a great tracking shot here that happens when they start getting on. We don't get the champagne bottle pop.
Nope.
But we get this cool tracking shot along all of the cars that are parked at the drive-in, and every one of them is like rocking and bopping around and shaking and everything. And they're all panel vans. They go by this white Holden HQ panel van. I thought it was funny because the license plate on it, and it's like rocking back and forth. And the license plate is MKN 537 for making sex, right? But it's funny because the reason I caught that is because I was like, whoa, and I did a double take because I was like, that's the Starsky and Hutch license plate, because Starsky and Hutch is 537ONN. And I was just like, it just triggered me for a second, but...
Of course, you caught that.
Clearly not intentional or anything else.
But... I should say I like the license plates in this movie. Most of them are vanity plates, kind of wild. They're all kind of basic and stuff. But yeah, so Carmen and Krabs, you get a shot of them. Carmen is very much obviously not wearing any clothing whatsoever, but it's through. You can't see too much because it's through a rain-soaked window. But thinking back, I'm like, this is like a 17 or 18-year-old actress, basically on top of a 36-year-old man. Problematic nowadays, to say the least, but I guess probably a little more common back then.
Sure.
When the back end of the car just falls, and Krabs throws some pants on and gets outside, and someone has stolen both back wheels.
I don't know how they pulled that off or how they didn't notice it, but it just drops.
No, it is. Well, I guess the idea is they're too into each other to even notice the fact that someone's jacked the car up a little bit, taking the tires off, and then just remove the jack in one fell swoop.
And in this moment, when they realize there's an exterior shot of the car, and we see another death scene on the screen from Turkey Shoot. But what's funny about this is the man on the screen is Roger Ward, because he was the police sergeant at the beginning of Death Cheaters. But you would know him as Moose from Chain Reaction in the orange coveralls.
Right, yeah.
All these movies, man, they all come back to
Yeah, so he runs out, and he realizes that the cops are the ones who have stolen his tires.
Yeah.
And we should say that long sort of tracking shot at the beginning before we get to the Chevy and Krabs and Carmen inside there, it's a flashlight looking at all the license plates.
Yes, you're right. It's the cops doing a patrol. Yeah.
It's the cops looking for his plate, so they know which car to take the tires from. So he goes in and he talks to Thompson, who's over in the office, and he's like, I want to report a theft. He's like, oh, really? Okay. He's like, well, I know who did it. And he's like, really? Well, why don't you come back in the morning and we'll fill out a report and we can. He says, do you want some blankets?
Right.
And I'm like, no, I have one.
Yeah.
Because they've got the awesome
tiger one.
print blanket that you left. Yeah, he offers that a couple of times. He said, well, then we'll deal with it in the morning.
But what I liked about this, not knowing anything about where this movie was going, I liked this scene because Thompson plays this down. And when he plays down this of urgency, it has this little Twilight Zone ominous sort of.
I was going to say it's got a Twilight Zone feel to it.
Yeah, like
he knows more than he's letting on. This weirdness is just normal, and you should just accept the fact that this is the way it is.
Yeah, and I think that's how this movie can get to the level that it gets to. A lot of times, if you set something up in a movie that's preposterous, people are like, oh God, this is so stupid, that wouldn't. But Thompson is this great character at diffusing these situations and sort of saying, no, everything's fine and carrying it on. And when you do something like that, the audience is along for the ride too.
Oh, yeah, it definitely piqued my interest. But yeah, so he just basically just come back in the morning. And so he goes back to his car. And now Carmen's like really into the movie. And Krabs is angry and annoyed because he's worried about what his brother's going to do to him because these wheels got stolen off the car that he's not supposed to be in.
The morning comes and there's this great guitar track, this bluesy guitar track, and it sounds like the Michael Kamen Lethal Weapon score that Jimmy Page played guitar on it. It's this bluesy and it's this slow pull out as Krabs opens the top on the Chevy and he stands up and he stretches and the sun's coming up.
Stretches in his briefs.
Yeah. But it's this cool shot because what's revealed is that the drive-in now, because we only saw it at night and it was packed.
Yeah.
And the drive-in now isn't as packed, but there's still a lot of cars there. But the way it's shown is that all the cars we thought were all cars in the night are actually like just destroyed, no wheels and tires, like dilapidated. They're almost like shanties, like people are living in them.
Yeah.
And the few nice cars that were there after the movie, clearly.
Yeah.
So now Krabs is the only person in this giant drive-in with a really nice car. And these older, decrepit cars are very much like tents for people.
Yeah, well, this is where we find out this is like a makeshift gated slum almost. But everyone crawling out of these cars, they look like punks. Carmen's very quick to kind of accept. So they get dressed. Carmen and him head over back to the office to make a report. And instead of report, more like Thompson's entering them into a system. Mm-hmm. And he's taken down their names and stuff.
And he has this interesting supercomputer-looking thing that he's very protective of.
Supercomputer-looking thing. It's a 286 if at best.
And monochrome too, but
and monochrome. But I should say there's like a disc caddy beside it, like a 5 1/4 inch disc holder that I swear I had the same one.
I think how many different versions of 5 1/4 floppy disc holders did exist at that time again?
Not many.
Did it have the lock on it and the smoked plastic lid?
I don't think it did. I think it had clear, which mine did. I don't think mine had the smoked. And I don't think I had a lock either. I just had the little push tab.
Oh, well, I think we've talked about this before, but the 5 1/4 floppies were the best thing ever, where you could double your memory if you had a pair of scissors.
Or a hole punch.
Yeah, that's right.
Flip it over, and we used hole punches.
I never knew that a hole punch went because I didn't know what the mechanism was like inside there, so I wouldn't have assumed that because the round hole punch worked, but clearly it did.
Yeah, so they go there, and he takes their information down, and instead of doing like a police report, like I said, he takes down their information instead, so he can enter them into the system, and then gives them like these 2 booklets of meal vouchers, and said you can use those over at the cafeteria, and you get, what does he say, $30 a week?
Yeah, this is a huge stretch because they stayed overnight, and now Krabs wants his wheels back and wants to get out of there. And again, this is that cool character that Thompson has, this Twilight Zone moment where he's like, here, $30 a week on meals, and he gives him these 2 booklets, and you're like, wait, what, a week? You're just as shocked as Krabs is. Then Krabs' discovery of this, like, you're going along with the audience, but like you said, Carmen is she's already into this idea pretty quickly,
and you realize, Carmen probably has nothing else. There's nothing else waiting for her. Krabs is like the only kind of cool, good thing going on in her life. Most of these kids don't have jobs, they don't have families, they don't have anything.
But we still, again, we don't know this.
Well, this is where Krabs says, well, I'm going to go, I'll get a cab or a bus. And he's like, well, there aren't any.
Right.
And it's an S road, meaning security road, which I guess is like, I think I read somewhere it's supposed to be electrified or something.
Oh, I see.
Or he says, I read that somewhere. I don't know how that true that is, because in the movie instead he says, if you have to drive on an S road, you can't walk or anything else because you'll get arrested, and it's like 3 months of hard labor or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and I think Thompson drops a line here, and he says, "You're stuck here until the governor decides what to do with you." So Thompson's not even the person. He's just working some job or operating something. And then it sort of, at that moment, it gets like a bigger scale of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at the same time, you get the impression Thompson likes Krabs, because Krabs is like, kind of a go-getter. He's just trying to figure everything out.
Because Carmen's buying into this. She's like, well, I'm hungry. Let's go to the diner. And then they go there, and it's another place just covered in graffiti, and there's a bunch of vagrants, and people are breakdancing. And
I should say before we get too far, I am impressed to see that an Australian in this movie does actually know how to break dance. Little
wow.
dig for you.
Yeah, that's true. They should have got whoever the hell did the breakdancing in this movie, because good Lord.
Guy would be in his 60s now.
And still be better.
Probably.
Geriatric out there, it's still fine.
Carmen's like, well, I'll have a milkshake. Oh, no, she wants a sundae. And the woman's like, well, you can't have that until they do that in the evening when the movie's showing. And there was like some other dessert or something that she wanted, or popcorn or something. And she said, no, that's at night when the movies are on.
You kind of get this idea that like you can order anything you want from this. It alludes to as long as you eat trash, because the woman's not that crazy about giving Krabs a healthier meal option.
No, like wasn't she offering him a burger instead because he can get an egg that way?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh no, he asked for orange juice or something at first, and she says no.
Yeah.
But because they only have like Fanta and like different sodas, and then that's when he opts for the milk.
Right. He's kind of a little more of living on the healthy side to some extent.
Yeah.
And
no, well, we get that from his running around, and then later on too. Like every day, he's basically jogging the circuit, and he's lifting cinder blocks and things to get some exercise.
Yeah, and so he just sort of decides that like, I'm gonna go find another Chevy, take some wheels and tires on. Like, we just got to get the hell out of here.
Well, he needs the Chevy because he's not willing to take any other tires, because he couldn't go back with other tires that aren't Chevy tires to his brother.
He goes out searching and again, this is a drive-in. This is just a big stadium type looking area essentially. And it's, you kind of get a little bit of a tour of the world. He's just sort of starts strolling around these slums, and you see all these cars, and people are just like sitting on lawn chairs outside the cars. Like, I think it's meant to set up this, like, everybody's just kind of relaxed. Nobody's working. Nobody's doing anything. There's no desire. And it's very much like a shanty town.
Exactly.
Where nobody's doing anything. Yeah.
And in the meantime, Carmen goes to the washroom to find showers and finds one.
Right.
And, befriends some of the women in there.
Yeah, she meets this character named Beth. And this is played by Sandy Livingston.
Yes.
And she was actually in Mad Max 3.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then they do each other's makeup and do all these crazy hairdos and everything else. And we intercut here to Thompson back at the box office, and he's working on his computer. It shows these statistics on there. And one of the things is about allowances of people at his location. And this is where I was like, wait, is this some kind of government ran prison? Again, I didn't know what was going on, but there's this, again, this ominous thing that Thompson is working on that nobody really knows about. We just had to take a break there because we need to celebrate. Jason is officially a grandpa as of a minute ago. Man.
It's not quite out yet from what I'm reading, but very close.
In the middle of talking about dead-end driving.
I have a grandson. Yeah. There you go. And we should say we're recording fairly late at night, which is why I'm not at the hospital. I was there earlier. I left.
Yeah, no, you didn't say, sorry, can't be here. Got a podcast to record.
Anyway, so Carmen's in the bathroom. She's getting a funky hair sock.
It's meant to look horrible. Like, they make it bad. They don't make it look good. It's kind of a joke about how bad her hair is. And she comes out and she's like, hey, check out my hair. But I think this is another plot device just showing that, like, like Carmen's conforming. She's like starting to make friends. She's liking it here. And this whole time Krabs is just like, nah, like I'm not into any of this sort of stuff.
Where you get the impression like Krabs, he's optimistic about life in general, which most of this generation just is not.
Yeah. Everybody around Krabs is digging it except for Krabs. And he talks to Thompson again, and he just sort of says like, okay, so who runs the spares market inside here? He's like, is it the cowboys or is it the cops? Because the cops stole his tires, remember? Mm-hmm. Thompson said, no, there's no spares market. There's no parts market. Like, this is your home. There's no market. Like, there's nothing. There's no industry here. There's no trading. If you don't have something, you can't get it. Thompson is, again, like I said, he's kind of taking on to Krabs because Krabs appears like a bit more of a go-getter to everybody. And Thompson's like,
well, he makes him take his toolbox from the office to the projection booth. Mm-hmm. And so he says, carry this for me. And they go over and he goes in the projection booth and they get in there and Thompson's like, open up that box. And he opens them up. And I know I said VB earlier because I like VB, but these are all Fosters in his toolbox. And he says, take one for yourself and hand me one. Thompson keeps trying to tell him, like, listen, man, accept your lot. This is where you are now.
And Krabs is like doing these like exercise routines. He's like running around the drive-in. He's carrying bricks and stuff. Like he's still trying to stay fit and do all his routines and it's, again, the juxtaposition is everybody else is just laying around. Yeah. And they're just doing whatever they want to do. And it doubles down on Krabs is a little more proactive than anybody in there. While he's jogging, he discovers a dead seagull.
Yeah, up on top of the fence, there's like a few runs of barbed wire, and then he sees the dead seagull, and he takes a pole that he picks up off the ground, puts it on there, and realizes the whole thing's electrified.
And he's the first to discover this too, because everybody else are still layabouts.
But when he tells them, they don't care.
They don't care. And this is a funny line because Krabs says to him, "Why should we care?" Thompson, and they reveal that like Thompson gives him drugs. He's like, we get drugs from Thompson. We can eat anything we want, which goes back to Carmen being able to get a strawberry sundae for breakfast or whatever. They get all this sort of stuff. And it's funny. And they're like, why should we care? This is great. We don't have to do anything. And Krabs looks at him and he's like, what's so great about playing 2-Up in the shithouse and hanging around a drive-in all day? And I thought it was funny because 2-Up's an old classic Aussie game where you have a wooden stick and 2 coins and you throw it, and how they land determines how you win and score.
Yeah, I had no idea what any of that meant, so thank you.
Yeah. Krabs still just doesn't want to conform. He doesn't want to be part of this, and he goes back to the car, and Turkey Shoot is still playing.
Krabs is running around again, and Thompson sees him, and he says, hey, swing over for a beer when you're done. So Krabs comes by, and of course the movie's still playing, and no one else is around. I think he checks in on Carmen at one point, and she is just entranced by that movie. Mm-hmm. It's almost like if this was a Twilight Zone episode, you'd realize it was hypnotizing her in some way.
Right.
But it's not. She's just like, this is the most important thing in my life now, is watching this movie. Then he goes back there and hangs out with Thompson, and they have a beer, and they're chatting, and Thompson's talking about like the good old days, what it was like around the theater. Kids used to sneak in, and
there's like a line of cars down the street. Like, it's kind of charming as his character. Like, he talks about like it's almost like he doesn't like how the drive-ins ran now. Like, he preferred how it used to be when it was this really fun place.
Yeah, before the world fell apart. It was charming, and he enjoyed it, and he loved it.
Yep.
Krabs kind of changes the conversation to the computer. There's a bunch of other star drive-ins.
Yeah, and then Krabs leaves the box office, and there's some guys playing cricket outside, but it quickly turns into, because Krabs isn't conforming, and so everybody else isn't happy with him, and somebody else throws Krabs a cricket bat, and then it becomes a cricket bat sword fight.
Yes.
Which is about as Aussie as it gets.
Yeah. The sort of other gang leader, he's this tall, gangly guy, who, again, is also probably in his 30s.
Yeah, he's like dressed like Rick Astley or something. Like.
Yes, he is. And Krabs kind of like starts running away a little bit and sneaks underneath this car, bursts the hood open, and grabs this guy, and we get another nut pinch.
He brains him with a brick.
He brains him with a brick, and then he nails him with, like, does the vice job on the nuts. Should have bingo cards or something with these things on them.
Champagne bottle,
nut
grab,
nut grab,
quarry.
Quarry. Exactly, the trifecta. So eventually he knocks the guy down and out.
Yeah, Krabs establishes a little bit of dominance here, and the crowd sort of shifts tune, and they're not as angry towards Krabs anymore.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the classic Escape from LA moment playing basketball, and Corvo Jones is there, and then he finally scores like nobody's made all the scores, and then everybody in the bleachers are like, "Wait a minute!" And they just start cheering for Snake. It's
another movie I haven't seen since I saw it in the theater.
Don't stop. We're supposed to be friends.
We're allowed to have different views, Sam.
But none of yours are good. So.
Let's talk about how Deep Impact is better than Armageddon.
Oh. I mean, this is why we started doing this podcast, which is funny because the whole point of doing this podcast was us, because we have very opposite views on movies, but
and yet we're agreeing way
all the movies
too
we
often.
agree on.
Yeah, we completely agree on. It's so funny. Yeah, I should say at this point his car now is covered in graffiti as well.
Yeah, so this is where Krabs returns to the Chevy, and it's all sun faded. It looks a lot worse than it was a day ago.
Yeah, and I guess he's been there for probably a week at this point, though.
Yeah. There's not a huge sense of time here, but yeah, he's definitely been there for long enough. And then he tries to start it, and now it's out of gas because he's been periodically starting it to make sure it runs, because all he knows previously all he needed was rear wheel and he could get out of there, and now it doesn't have any gas. Now he's like really SOL. So then at this point he turns over to the main gates. A couple of auto transports come in loaded with cars. One car on the back of the truck is a 57 Chevy, and Krabs eyes it, and it's got rear wheels on it.
Like
and
Chevy wheels.
Yeah, and so it's a 4-door, but it's still going to be the same step pattern. And so he's just like, also then this truck comes in with a bunch of prisoners on it too.
Well, they don't look like prisoners. They look like refugees. And we should point out they're pretty much they all look like brown skinned or Asian. The crowd start yelling, "Asians go home."
And then it cuts inside the diner, and again, Carmen is at the diner, and she's sort of with everybody else saying, yeah, like the more prisoners that come in here, it makes our quality of life worse because they use all of our food and all of our resources. So,
and this is where you see the real message of the movie here, which is it's you have this aloof society that doesn't want to work for anything, and then when immigrants come in who are willing to work, they turn on them. Yeah,
this is 100% the social commentary right here. Yeah. And when the police bring all of these new immigrants in, they also bring a big old stack of drugs to Thompson. And one of them opens a bag and he says to Thompson, he's like, "That's right, 100% Queensland hit." So it's clearly some tie-in about Queensland having great weed or something. While the cops are showing the dope and the drugs to Thompson, that he's going to distribute to all the kids, Krabs gets an idea. He's like, okay, I can get some gas here because the cop car's there and it's got gas in it.
Siphon out of the back of the cop car.
Yeah, so he runs up the back of the cop car and milks.
Meanwhile, everybody else is in the cafeteria having a meeting on what are we going to do with these Asians.
Right.
And we should say it's not like hundreds are coming in or anything. It's like 14 people.
Yeah.
It's not that many, and half of them are kids.
These people don't want to split their being able to have a strawberry sundae at 9 o'clock in the morning for anything else.
No, well, obviously, if they're having some, that's less for us. So Krabs is like siphoning gas. The cops are up there talking to Thompson. He's sort of around the back of it, siphons a bit. It spills a bit on the ground, but manages to get some. And then, of course, he can't get away because they're talking and they're ready to start to go away. So he kind of backs up to the back of the car and he kind of hunches down, and one of the cops is smoking a cigarette, drops it right in the pool of gas that Krabs spilled, but it doesn't ignite. So Krabs is like, okay, cool. And then so when the car drives off, Krabs sneaks away, and that's when the cigarette lights the gas. So there's this little burning puddle of gas on the pavement, and Thompson takes note of it.
He's clued into this.
He's clued into something's going on there. Yeah, so Krabs gets back to the car.
But he thinks he's got everything ready to go.
Yeah, he does.
And he pitches it. He's to Carmen. He's like, "Hey, like, okay, we'll go to Taz. I got the gas. Let's go." And she doesn't want to.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't at all. She's happy there.
She is completely entrenched in this world.
Yeah.
And at this point too, we cut back to Thompson, and he's at the in the box office. and he's looking at all of the list of all the star drive-ins. Two of them, it says reached population, but his seems to be dwindling. And I don't know the point of this. Like, again, I was like, oh, maybe something's going to happen if all the drive-ins are full. Like, is this a moment or something? We don't really find out, but I felt like this was an important plot device that didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, they allude to something bigger, and then, again, as is often a theme with these movies we do, it doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
Krabs tries to start his car, and then he opens up the hood and realizes there's a whole bunch of pieces missing. More parts are missing, and that's why it can't start. So then he goes and confronts Thompson about this.
Then another round of auto transports and cop cars come into the drive-in.
That's right. And Thompson goes to meet them. That's when Krabs hops on the computer. Because in typical 1980s computer security fashion, the password is written on masking tape on the keyboard of the computer.
Still how I do mine. The password is galactic.
Start to get an idea of what the plan is. But again, it's all stuff we've pretty much already seen. He just knows that they're basically using these drive-ins as makeshift prisons, really.
Yeah, and there's a tracking number for how many are filling up and which ones. And then some of the tow trucks are bringing in all the other scrap cars. And then, so this is where, the Man from Hong Kong's playing on the theater. We see the hang gliding sequence going on.
Yes,
but this is a really cool moment in the movie because Krabs sees one of the tow trucks sitting there and looks at it as a way out.
Yeah.
And as he goes up and he attacks the tow truck drivers, but he's got a tire iron, and when he starts hitting them, it's in sync with the sound effects from the Man from Hong Kong.
Yes.
So nobody around is worried because they think the sounds and the impacts are coming from the movie, but it's Krabs just beating up the tow truck drivers.
It is kind of funny that they go, he hits a guy on the back of the knees and he goes down, and it's like, but then he's down.
Yeah.
And not crying out or anything else.
Doesn't say any noise. Yeah.
Hits another guy, punches him in the gut, and he's just, down, no sounds, nothing. It's just, but still, it's a cool little sequence. He gets into the tow truck and he tries to drive out, and Thompson's there with a couple of cops by the gate, and Thompson's like confused, like, why is this guy already trying to leave? And he walks up, and Krabs tries kind of to hide his face and stuff, because Thompson's got a flashlight and he's shining at the window, and then suddenly he just yells, "Stop him!" And that's when you realize the cops have some serious firepower.
Yeah, so they start blasting at the tow truck, and then we get a car chase here, which
in the drive-in,
which I don't think I've ever seen a car chase in a locked location. You see it in parking garages or whatever.
Yeah.
But this is truly just in the one location, and it's still a great car chase. And they're backing down up and down the alleys of all the slums and the cars and stuff. While usually my comment on a car chase is like, if you feel a good traverse, scenery changes and locale changes and different vegetation and different look, you're like, oh man, this chase is really moving. This, you don't get any of that, but you still feel it's still a cool chase. And so it's just very well executed to have a car chase in one location and it still be entertaining.
Well, and by this point, people inside the cafeteria that are having their what are we going to do about these Asians meeting, start coming out. They just realize all the shots are being fired, and they all run back in.
The whole place is on fire now, and everything's like burning, and it's total chaos. And Krabs storms the box office, and he holds Thompson at gunpoint.
Well, because he sees a cop leave. One cop goes to see if reinforcements are coming, basically. So when he pulls the gun on Thompson, and then when the cop comes back, he hides under the desk.
Thompson doesn't have a bar of that. He just tells the cop straight away, there's a guy here.
Get him, he's here. He pops up, and the cop, lets a shot off.
Thompson grabs his gun.
Oh, right.
And the gun goes off, and it shoots the cop.
That's right.
The cop fires back, and he shoots Thompson.
That's right.
And now this is essentially a plot device to make Krabs be able to defuse the situation, get rid of the two people that are problems for him, but also
be responsible for their deaths, not directly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's actually cut really well. It flies very well. It's a lot better than Han and Greedo, I'll tell you that.
Han always shot first, and Greedo never shot at all.
You tell that to anybody now, though. This is the pinnacle moment for Krabs, and he makes a run for it, and he grabs the cop car, the paddy wagon, the one that stole his tires from the beginning. One of the best car jumps I'd seen in a long time.
Yeah, we should point out, for whatever reason, there is a conveniently placed ramp.
It is the biggest ramp ever. in the middle of.
Leads basically to where the sign and the box office are.
Krabs just pins it, and he goes up this thing, and he clears the box office, crashes through the neon drive-in sign. It's such a spectacle. I love how big this jump is, but my problem with this is this jump is multi-cut, and I think they only shot one take of this thing. But it's one of those things where I wish that some of these like stunts would just be take a breath and step back and be wider. That I understand that excitement comes from cuts, but when you can hold something for a long wide that's a spectacle like this, I would much prefer to see this thing go up and over through the light all in one take.
I think the problem is, though, because, he's taking off inside the drive-in and he's landing outside the drive-in, and there's like massive fences all around it. So I don't know if they could ever get an angle that would work unless they did something aerial.
There's definitely some stuff either side of the fence, but it's still cut too much.
Both halves of this jump look fantastic. That car lands and bounces.
And and the landing is clearly a different setup, and the car only comes from 10 feet, but it still has a bounce, and you see all the bed flexing and stuff. Yeah, it's great, but when you see the launch, I just want to stay on it for longer.
It's just never good enough for you, Sam, is it? It's just never good enough for
you. Nothing's ever good enough. Just like when Dukes of Hazzard went to Minute.
So anyway, the car jumps, it bounces, he gets down, and he's driving straight out. He's on the security road, the S road as they call it, and he's just barreling along. The sun's coming up, and he just goes, beauty. and roll credits.
That line delivery reminds me at the end of Death Cheaters when Steve is just like, well, it's a living. And credits it's just this one line, and it's great. Yeah. What's funny about this is him driving on this thing like he's escaped, and he's smiling, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. He's lost his girl. He doesn't have his brother's car. Everything in the world is great to him. Like
he's probably been gone for a month too.
Yeah,
and his mom and his brother probably assume he's dead.
And he's just stoked. He's on cloud nine. I mean, it's a cool jump, but yeah, it's a weird switch. And then
smiling to himself, beauty.
Truly, credits roll. Like he's into the dawn, and he's lost everything he's got, but he's stoked about it.
World's gone to hell, but he's got his freedom.
That's it. This movie, the budget came in 2.3 mil, which is
significant.
We noticed it's all in one location other than the first act, but that's still very reasonable.
No, and they make good use of it. It's one of those movies where you believe that it's all there on screen.
It looks great. It really does. The score, I really, really like the score. So this is composed by Frank Stangio. He also worked on Brian Turner Smith for BMX Bandits and did a couple other things. The official logline for this movie, quote, in a dystopian future Australia, a health nut and his tag-along girlfriend become trapped in a drive-in cinema that has become a concentration camp for delinquent youths and refugees. What I don't like about this is it takes away the mystery of what it could be and what it is. When I was watching, because I didn't read this logline before, I was like, oh, what is Thompson up to? What is this? Are they going to turn him into Soylent Green? Are they going to turn him into like... I came up with all these awesome ideas in my mind. Not necessarily awesome, but just bigger, more grandiose things than what it really was. I think there might have been a larger concept here that never made it to screen.
Yeah, it feels like it sometimes.
This was a 35-day shoot, and the drive-through location that Brian Trenchard Smith used was the one that he went to with his father, and in 1970, together they saw Sam Peckinpah's Major Dundee.
Oh, nice.
Tarantino said that this is his favorite Brian Trenchard Smith movie.
Don't think I can agree with that.
There's one part in this is that on the side of, you only see it a couple times, but on the side of the box office, there's a neon sign that says Dusk Till Dawn. And I was like, man.
I see where you're going with that.
Again, this whole movie, I'm like, well, what's going to happen? Why are they stuck there? And then when I think Dusk Till Dawn, it's like they're stuck in this bar, and then everything changes, and now it's this...
From Dusk Till Dawn is a Rodriguez movie, but Tarantino, I think, wrote it and is in it.
Same reasoning for talking about Planet Terror, even though it's a Rodriguez movie.
Well, they're buddies, and obviously there's some influence there.
Right.
So,
but yeah, you see a lot of chain reaction in Planet Terror, and I think there's a lot of this in Dusk Till Dawn, which is kind of interesting.
There's one thing I saw on IMDb. There's a user review and the subject line is cast member. And
Excellent.
y'all, yes, it was kind of a silly movie, but I was in it! 3 exclamation marks. Cheryl the girl dispensing contraception in the toilet block. Hey, we had such a hoot making this movie. The explosion scenes were fabulous, and the people I worked with were great. My family haven't seen it, husband and kids, because I've always been embarrassed by it, but so many people found it so much fun, so that in a way it was a success, albeit cultish. P.S. All I remember about Brian Trenchard Smith was that he kept talking about another actress who he thought was determined for big things, Nicole Kidman. So I guess he had an eye for talent. So this would obviously be referencing, he was talking about BMX Bandits.
Yeah, because that was her breakout, and he put her. That's so great.
Nice.
Brent Blanken was credited in this movie as Carpenter, and I love movies from back in the day because there's carpenters, there's machinists. Sometimes you even see welders credited. Real people doing real jobs, not 4 wide credit visual effects artists.
Mm-hmm.
Brent Blanken as a carpenter, which is his very first credit. This guy went on to be construction foreman and construction manager on District 9, and then like all of the big movies like Marvel and everything else. So this is like a really cool career growth to see, like when it's a very first credit is just carpenter, and now he's on it. So Brett Keeping, who's an electrician on this movie. And right after this movie from 1986, he went on to the 1987 box office juggernaut Time Guardian.
Nice.
Again, it's the small world, man. Like everybody's worked on everything. So this movie was next in line for New World Pictures to redub.
Oh, they were going to pull a Mad Max on it, were they?
Yeah, so they wanted to follow what, because that was American International that did the dialogue track for Mad Max, and they wanted to go along. So they recorded an American dub version, and it came out so bad that the studio just tanked the idea right there and then on the screening. And they said,
Shocking.
the recorded dubbing for this is probably the Batgirl of today. There's like, we can't release this.
Well, I mean, having seen the dub of Mad Max when it was first released here, and then the subsequent, proper release, the original North American release of Mad Max is unwatchable.
I need to actually watch or find a copy of that version because growing up in Australia, I never saw that bad, but I hear stories about how bad it was.
You'd probably be able to find a VHS copy for sure of that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something of it, yeah.
It still happens, though. If you remember the movie The Castle,
yeah,
there is a line in that where they're talking about, and he's like, one of the voiceovers is, my dad's favorite movie is Hey, Hey, It's Saturday.
Right.
My wife worked on it at one point. She rented it so we could watch it. And they changed that line to Dad's favorite show is funniest home videos or funniest videos or something like that. And it's like, we could have figured out, hey, it's Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, regionally it works. I mean,
who cares?
Demolition Man did the same thing because everything's about Taco Bell, but in Australia on home video,
well, that was most of the world. They changed that for almost all. Like it was just a North American release. I think they kept it as Taco Bell, and
it was Pizza Hut everywhere else.
It was Pizza Hut everywhere else, but they also did 2 versions of the movie like that too. It wasn't just dubbed, right? Like I think they changed logos and they shot alternate scenes.
Yeah, it's so poor though. Like there's a shot where they pull up to Taco Bell and there's this 2D comp that's got corner pins on it for the Pizza Hut. It's very poor. And there's an insert shot where John Spartan is trying to figure out what all the crazy people are attacking for. And he picks up this plastic jar, and it's a jar of croutons, and it says Taco Bell on it. But in the Pizza Hut version, it's actually a different shot, and it's a hand with a leather glove and a dark robe behind it, and it's so different because they didn't want to track a Pizza Hut logo into a curved plastic jug, so they actually just reshot somebody, and it's so terrible.
They shot an insert. Yeah. I mean, I've had the odd movie where we've done an insert in The Office with an iPhone and stuff, and
right,
you do it occasionally, and it's don't look too closely at the skin color on that hand. It's not quite the same shade tone, but it's quick, and we'll throw it in, and we'll just do some color correction.
Alternate release titles, you know how much I love those. So in the US release was just called Dead End. Sure. West Germany was Krabs die Zunkfoot, which I butchered how to pronounce that, by the way.
Still, that's awesome. The fact that Krabs is there.
Yeah. Italy was Drive-In 2000. Kind of cool.
Okay.
I dig that.
Yeah.
Spain was just called Star Drive-In after the Drive-In the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, outrageous there. IMDb coming in at 5.9.
Yeah, it's a smidge low, I think. but
Yeah, me too.
but again, it's above average. So
Yeah,
if average is 5, I don't know.
This is entertaining to watch. It sounds great. It looks great.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a good time locked piece of Australian cult stuff.
1980s. It's a little slower than some of the other ones we've watched. Certainly like than Chain Reaction or Man from Hong Kong. It's definitely slower. There's some montages in here that can feel kind of reused.
Well, it's like two of the 3 acts are in the same location. So.
Oh, exactly. No, I get it. But this one's, got a social commentary that the few other movies we've watched from Brian doesn't have, which is great. And it's a fun, and again, it looks good.
So, I mean, as we always say, like, would you remake it? I mean, I don't think you could. You couldn't make this with the same charm and, again, vibrance. It would be a very different movie.
If you did, it would still have to be a period piece. You'd have to make it an alternate reality, late 80s, 90s kind of thing to make it work.
Right.
Because I don't think it does otherwise. I don't think you could take it modern day and just slip it 5 years in the future and say, all hell's broken loose and this is what it is now. And it's just a bunch of kids doing like Instagram poses and TikTok dances or something.
Yeah.
But might be the commentary you do, but I don't know if it would work as well.
Yeah, you give them free Wi-Fi and pizza rolls or something, and
but
they
I don't think Wi-Fi would work though, because it would be, they'd be able to see what the rest of the world's like and what's going on, and that wouldn't work for this.
Right, because that's the cool thing about this is the idea is that
this is pre-internet.
We put you in this area and you have everything you need and want, and you have to do nothing.
But
and
you
they don't
have
have to
no idea what happens outside those walls.
Exactly. So you could even, and that's where I think the movie could have, had concepts to be bigger and grander, where it's more these are like shut-ins at this point. They don't know what's really happening out there, and that's where I'm like, the government could be telling them the world's horrible, and now they're using them to turn them into grease for some kind of machine or like anything. Like there's
there could be a total like 1984 thing going on here, and I mean the novel at this point.
Yeah.
Where the government just tells you the way it is, and that's how it is, and you don't get to question it.
Exactly, and that's why I mentioned like Soylent Green, or even to a lesser extent The Island. They're all clones and they're grown for their organs for wealthy people or whatever. Like you could do a real lot with this setup. And I think the biggest thing it's missing is some kind of really big gotcha at the end of like, whoa, they're being, like that Twilight Zone hook or something like that, because it gets really close.
Mm-hmm. So I think we covered everything.
Yeah, that was a fun time, man. And congrats again on us doing a podcast in the middle of you becoming great. We made history, dude.
Yeah, no, I thought I had a few hours more, but it's too late and I'm not going to the hospital. I will meet this kid in the morning.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think he's ever going to watch Casino?
Not if I have anything to do with it.
That's right. Awesome. Well, join us next time on episode 15. As always, anything but casino.
All right, bud.
Thanks, man. Have a great time. Cheers.
Therefore, whatever appears on the television screen emerges as raw experience for those who watch it. Therefore, television is reality, and reality is less than television.